He said it like he was reading from a lease agreement. Not angry, not ashamed, just calm, the way people get when they've already decided something and are only now bothering to tell you about it. My son-in-law stood in my kitchen, the one where I'd made Sunday pot roast for 31 years, where my husband had kissed me on the forehead every single morning before work, where I'd cried alone at the counter the night he died. And he looked at me and said, "We need you to sign the house into both our names, or we're going to have to make some changes around here." I didn't say anything. I'm 63 years old. I taught 4th grade for 27 years. I know how to wait out a room. He kept talking. Something about how they needed the equity to consolidate his business debt. Something about how it was just paperwork. Something about how I was sitting on an asset while they were struggling. He used words like leverage and collateral and restructuring, the kind of words that sound important until you realize they're just dressed up ways of asking for something that isn't yours to take. I nodded slowly. I said, "Let me think about it." And he said, "We kind of need an answer by the end of the week." I nodded again. He left the kitchen. I stood there listening to his footsteps go back down the hall, back toward the guest room that used to be my daughter's childhood room, where the lavender wallpaper was still up because she'd loved it so much. I never had the heart to change it. I turned to the window and looked out at the backyard. My husband's rose bushes were still there along the fence line. He'd planted them the spring our daughter was born. Every year I kept them going because he couldn't anymore. I thought about what he had just asked me to do. And I thought, so this is how it starts. My daughter had called me 8 months before that conversation. It was a Tuesday, early March, still cold enough that I was running the heat. She said she and her husband were in a difficult spot. His landscaping business had taken on too much debt, equipment loans, a commercial lease on a storage facility he'd signed without telling her, a couple of subcontractors he owed back pay to. She didn't tell me the number right away. She worked up to it the way you work up to jumping into cold water. Slow, then all at once. $280,000. I sat down. She said they weren't asking for money. She said they just needed a place to stabilize while he sorted things out. She said it would be 6 months, maybe 8. She said, "You have all that space, Mom, and it's just you in that house." That last part landed differently than she meant it to. Just you. Like my living there alone was a waste. Like a house where a person had built an entire life was now just square footage, waiting to be used correctly. But she was my daughter. She was 41, and she was scared. And I had raised her, and I loved her. So I said yes. They moved in on a Saturday in April. Her husband, I'll call him my son-in-law because I no longer know what else to call him, rented a U-Haul and brought more than I expected. A sectional sofa that didn't fit through the front door until he took it apart. A second television, which went in the guest room. 3 storage bins of things that went straight into my garage without asking. I didn't say anything about the garage. My daughter unpacked the kitchen first. She rearranged my cabinet where I keep my coffee mugs because she said the one I used was all the way in the back. She was trying to be helpful. I understood that. I put my mug back where it was after she went to bed. The first 2 months were fine, the way things are fine when everyone is still being careful. My son-in-law had phone calls in the mornings, loud ones, pacing back and forth in the dining room where I used to read the paper. He was negotiating things, renegotiating things, pushing deadlines. I learned not to come downstairs before 9. I started drinking my first cup of coffee in my bedroom with the door closed, standing at the window looking at the roses. My daughter worked from home 3 days a week. On those days, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and her AirPods in, and sometimes we'd have lunch together, and those hours were good. Those were the hours that reminded me why I said yes. Then summer hit, and something shifted. I don't know if it was the heat or the stress of his business not recovering the way he predicted, or something between the two of them that I wasn't seeing. But my son-in-law started talking differently in the house. Not to me exactly. He mostly didn't talk to me. More like around me, loud enough for me to hear. Comments about the thermostat, comments about the yard needing work, a comment once while I was loading the dishwasher that I was loading it inefficiently. I turned around and looked at him and he shrugged and said he was just saying, my daughter was quiet during these moments. She didn't agree out loud, but she didn't disagree either. And silence, I learned a long time ago, is its own kind of answer. My granddaughter visited in July. She's 7, bright-eyed, calls me Nana, and the 3 days she was there were the best 3 days of those 8 months. We baked snickerdoodles and watched an old Gene Kelly movie she didn't understand, but pretended to. She slept in my room in the little rollaway I keep in the closet for her, and I read to her until she fell asleep, and I thought, this is what matters. This. Not any of the rest of it. After she left, the house felt quieter and heavier. In August, my son-in-law started working from home full-time. The business was, in his words, pivoting. He set up in the dining room permanently, my dining room with the table my husband and I had bought at an estate sale in 1998, the one with the slight wobble on the left leg that we'd always meant to fix and never did because it became a kind of joke between us. Now it had a laptop and 2 monitors and a ring light on it. I asked once, gently, whether it might work better in the guest room. He said the Wi-Fi signal was stronger in the dining room. I said I understood. I started eating my meals at the kitchen island instead. In September, my daughter came to me with paperwork. She sat down across from me at the kitchen island, and she spread out some documents and she said, "We found a way that might help things." She said her husband had spoken with a financial advisor who suggested that if the house were in both their names, not taken from me. She was careful to say that, not taken from me, just listed jointly, it would give them access to a refinancing option that could settle the business debt at a lower interest rate. She said it was just a formality. She said I would still live there. Of course I would still live there. It was my home. I looked at the papers. I looked at my daughter. I thought about the morning in 2019 when her father died in the hospital bed they brought into our bedroom at the end, and how she'd held my hand in the parking lot afterward and said, "You're not alone, Mum. We're not going to let you be alone." I said, "Let me think about it." She said, "Of course, take your time." Her husband gave me until the end of the week. That was the kitchen conversation. That was the lease agreement voice. That was the moment he stood in my kitchen and said the words that made something go very still inside me. Not angry still, not sad still, decided still. I want to tell you what I did that week because I think it matters. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of anyone. I didn't call my sister and vent on the phone. I didn't post anything online or talk to a neighbor. I called my attorney. His name is a private thing. He's been my family's attorney for 19 years, and he doesn't need to be named here. I called him on Wednesday morning from my car, parked 2 streets over, with the radio off. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about him. When I was finished, he asked 2 questions. First, was my name the sole name on the deed? Yes, I told him. My husband and I had held it jointly, and when he died it transferred to me alone through the right of survivorship clause we'd set up years ago. Second question, had I signed anything? No, I told him, nothing. He said, "Good, keep it that way. Come see me Friday." I saw him Friday morning at 9. We talked for 2 hours. He laid out my options clearly, the way a good attorney does. Not telling me what to decide, just showing me the ground I was standing on and what each step would mean. There was more ground than I realized. He explained irrevocable living trust. I'd heard the term before but never fully understood it. He explained it slowly, plainly. My house, my accounts, my small investment portfolio, all of it could be moved into a trust where I remained the trustee and the beneficiary. I would control everything. live in the house exactly as I always had, but the assets themselves would technically belong to the trust, not to me personally. And a trust, unlike a house in my name, cannot simply be signed over, cannot be leveraged, cannot be touched without my explicit, documented consent as trustee. He said it would take about 3 weeks to complete. He said it would cost about $2,000 in legal fees. I wrote him a check on the spot. I drove home. My son-in-law was on the phone in the dining room. My daughter was upstairs. I made a cup of tea in my kitchen and I sat at the island and I looked out at the rose bushes through the window. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Settled. I did not tell them about the attorney. I did not tell them about the trust. On Sunday evening, my daughter knocked on my bedroom door and asked if I'd had time to think about the papers. I said I had some more questions, and could we talk more next week? She said, of course, and her voice was soft, and I wondered whether she actually knew how far her husband's plan went, or whether she was also just someone who'd gotten in over her head and stopped knowing how to swim. I think about that still. I don't know the answer. Maybe both things were true. The following 2 weeks, I went about my life. I went to my book club on Tuesdays. I had lunch with my friend from the school where I used to teach. I visited my granddaughter and brought her a book about a girl who discovers a door in her grandmother's garden that leads somewhere wonderful. She loved it. I held her for a long time before I left. At the house, things continued their slow unraveling. My son-in-law began referring to the third bedroom, not the guest room, the one at the end of the hall that I used as a sewing room and had kept some of my husband's things in, as the other office. He mentioned it twice in 1 week, casually, in passing. He mentioned the Wi-Fi range again. He mentioned that he was going to need a quieter space for some upcoming calls. I said I'd think about it. The second time he mentioned it, he added that he thought some of the stuff in there could probably go into storage. My husband's things probably go into storage. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "That room is not available." He looked back at me the way people look when they expected you to move and you didn't. My daughter was standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything. That night I called my attorney. The trust was nearly complete. He said a few more days. I said, "That's fine." I slept well that night, the first time in a long time. The papers were finalized on a Thursday. I signed them in his office at 2 in the afternoon. He explained each page. I asked questions where I had them. When it was done, he shook my hand and said, "You protected yourself. That's a good thing." I drove home. I made dinner. My daughter and son-in-law came down and we ate together, and my son-in-law talked about a new client he was trying to land, and my daughter mentioned wanting to repaint the guest room, and I listened and nodded and said the right things at the right times. After dinner, I washed the dishes. I watched a little television. I went to bed. On Friday evening, my son-in-law brought the papers to me again. He set them on the kitchen island while I was making tea and said they really did need an answer. He said he'd been more than patient. He said it in that level, carefully controlled voice that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. He said if I wasn't willing to work with them on this, they were going to have to reconsider the arrangement. I asked what that meant. He said it meant they might need to look at other options. He said the house was too large for just one person. He said, with the equity tied up here, they couldn't move forward. He said all of this while looking at the kitchen counter, not at me. I turned off the stove. I turned around. I looked at him for a long moment, the way I used to look at a student who had just told me a lie, and we both knew it and were deciding whether we were going to acknowledge that or not. Then I said, "I think you should look at those other options." He looked up. I said, "I've spoken with my attorney. The house has been placed in a revocable living trust. I am the sole trustee. There is nothing to sign over because it's no longer mine to sign. It belongs to the trust, and I am the trust." He stared at me. I said, "I'd like you and my daughter to start making arrangements to move out. I think 60 days is reasonable. I'll put that in writing if you'd like. He opened his mouth. I said, "This is still my home. It will remain my home. I want to be clear about that." And then I picked up my tea and I walked back down the hall toward my bedroom, past the lavender wallpaper, past the sewing room where my husband's things were still exactly where I'd put them, and I closed the door behind me. I sat in the chair by the window. Outside, the rose bushes were dark shapes in the evening light, and I thought about my husband, the way he could make me laugh by doing absolutely nothing, the way he always knew when something was wrong before I said a word, the way he used to say that the two most powerful things in the world were patience and paperwork, and that if you had both, you didn't need much else. He was right. He was almost always right about the important things. My daughter called me the next morning. I answered. She was crying. Not the sharp, loud kind of crying, but the slow, tired kind, the kind that takes a long time to get to. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't understood how far he'd taken things. She said she didn't know about some of it, and she should have paid more attention, and she was sorry. She kept saying she was sorry. I listened. I said, "I know." She said, "I don't want to lose you." I said, "You're not losing me, but you need to go build your own life. Both of you. That's not something I can do for you." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad would have handled this so much better than us." I laughed a little. Not because it was funny, because it was true, and because my husband would have hated every minute of it, and also would have found a way to make me laugh about it afterward. I said, he would have. But I handled it just fine. They moved out 53 days later into an apartment about 20 minutes from my house. The business debt is still being sorted out. I don't know all the details, and I've stopped asking. My daughter and I have lunch about twice a month. We don't talk about those 8 months unless she brings it up first. Slowly, something is being rebuilt between us. Not the same thing that was there before, but something. I don't know yet what it will look like when it's finished. My son-in-law and I have not spoken since the kitchen. I don't expect that to change. The dining room table is mine again. The slight wobble on the left leg is still there. My coffee mug is in the front of the cabinet where I like it. The sewing room is exactly as I left it. The rose bushes survived the winter the way they always do, which still surprises me every spring and maybe always will. I am 63 years old. I live alone in my home. I make my own decisions, and I protect the things that matter to me. My husband used to say I was the most quietly stubborn person he had ever met. I've decided to take that as a compliment. Because here's what I know now. What I knew standing in that kitchen with my cup of tea and my paperwork, already signed and my name already on the trust. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to fight. You don't have to beg anyone to see your worth or explain to them why they should. You just have to know what belongs to you and hold on to it. There's something I've been sitting with since all of this settled down, and it's harder to say than the story itself. I did not handle things perfectly. I let it go on too long. I watched the slow erosion of my own home, my comfort, my routines, my space, and I kept telling myself it was love that made me patient. But at some point, patience without a plan is just avoidance. I know that now. I knew it, honestly, when I was standing at the kitchen window, looking at my husband's rose bushes while my son-in-law paced the dining room. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. What finally moved me wasn't anger. It was clarity. There's a difference. Anger makes you loud. Clarity makes you effective. The moment I stopped asking myself, how could they do this, and started asking, what do I actually need to do right now, that was the moment everything changed. I picked up the phone. I called my attorney. I protected what was mine. Not because I stopped loving my daughter, because I finally respected myself enough to act. I think about my granddaughter a lot when I think about what this whole thing taught me. She's 7. She's watching everything, even when we think she isn't. What I want her to see in me isn't bitterness And it isn't passivity either. I want her to see a woman who knew the difference between what she could give freely and what was not for anyone else to take. I want her to see that doing the right thing isn't always the dramatic thing. Sometimes it's just a phone call. Sometimes it's just a signature. Sometimes the most powerful move is the quiet one. What happened in my home followed a simple logic, the kind that doesn't require any religion or philosophy to understand. People who are not held accountable for the small things will keep reaching for the larger ones. My son-in-law didn't start with the house. He started with the thermostat, with the dishwasher, with a comment about storage. Each small overreach that met no resistance made the next one feel possible to him. That's not a mystery. That's just how it works. And the reversal worked the same way. In the other direction, one firm boundary, backed by paperwork, stopped everything. I'm not telling you to distrust the people you love. I'm telling you that love without clear thinking is not protection, not for you and not for them. My daughter needed to learn that her mother had limits. That was something I should have shown her sooner and more clearly. The mercy I thought I was offering by staying quiet was actually a kind of harm. 63 years has taught me this much. Character isn't what you say when things are comfortable. It's what you do when someone is standing in your kitchen telling you to sign away the life you built. It's whether you have the self-possession to breathe, to wait, to think clearly, and to act. Not from fear, not from rage, but from a quiet knowledge of who you are and what you will not surrender. My husband used to say patience and paperwork. He was right. He was almost always right about the important things.